So, ladies and gentlemen, we have with us today Frank Mallett, who lives in Pitsea, so he is a Buzzardon resident, and we have two young gentlemen here. We have Callum and we have Ethan, who are from Beauchamp School, who will be travelling to Normandy in July. Frank had a father who was actually serving in the forces on D-Day itself, on the 6th of June 1944. And the guys here are here to find out what they can about Frank's father, Stan, in 1944, and looking at some of the experiences that he can pass on to us. So I will leave it to you, gentlemen. I don't know what Frank wants to briefly explain what his father was up to 80 years ago, and then perhaps the two students can wade in with some questions they might want to ask for more information. Yep. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Over to you, Frank.
Okay. Well, Dad joined the RAF because of the bombing on his hometown of Exeter. It was during the war, and Plymouth and Exeter took quite a pounding with bombers that were coming in from the Atlantic, and and they had to drop them somewhere, so they got quite a bombing. Dad decided to sign up to the RAF, and not knowing what that would entail or where that would take him, but in the end it took him to some very specialist training as a radar operator, not only the normal radar operating, but also specialist stuff which was new at the time, and also they trained him in combat, which was unusual for Royal Air Force, because they're not expected to undertake hand-to-hand combat, but they knew that the situation they were going to be putting them into meant that this might be needed. So that's how he arrived at being an RAF person involved in D-Day. Okay.
So obviously on Normandy you got the 5 different beaches.
Yes.
So what beach did your dad arrive on?
Dad arrived on Omaha Beach with the Americans. And this was because they lacked the expertise for radar. The Americans did, and so this is why Dad was specially trained to join with them and to go out and be part of the invasion. And he didn't know this until pretty much a month or so before the event.
Yeah. So when your dad obviously arrived, had there been a problem with his uniform?
Oh yes. Yeah, the RAF has blue serge, and it was coated with some chemical which was designed to protect them. But what actually happened was when the uniform got wet, it looked more like the field grey of the enemy.
Right.
Now, you'd think that wouldn't make much difference, but actually it ended up that Americans were shooting what we call friendly fire. They were shooting at the English because they thought they were German. And also, in fact, 2 of them were arrested.
Right.
By the Americans. Obviously, they realised what was going on. And so what they did was they issued them with American khaki strip, which is their combat training equipment, and they wore this all the way through to the liberation of Paris.
So you mentioned about him moving inland. So what did your dad actually do once he'd got off the beach?
Okay, yeah, it was quite a job getting off the beach. He was being fired on continuously, and everybody around him seemed to be dying. But as they moved inland, they managed to get over the top, as they call it. They assisted the Americans in the building of an airstrip, which was needed to land support troops and support services following the invasion. Now, what they did was they built a strip, an airstrip, within 1 day. Normally that takes about 13 days, 2 weeks at least. But they managed to get this done within a day, and this was just in time, because even as they were finishing it, there was a Dakota aircraft filled with carrying American nurses. And that landed pretty much as the runway was being finished. And Dad, seeing these, he described them as girls. That's probably not the term to use these days, but he described them as girls, and he said to see them landing and coming out of the aircraft to a place where thousands of lives have been lost in the last few hours was pretty incredible.
Yeah. So,
Go
on.
Did Stan have any family members that also fought during the war, or was it just?
No, Dad is the only one that I'm aware of. My grandfather was in the services, but as far as I'm aware, wasn't involved in any combat fighting at all.
So you've mentioned that obviously a lot of lives were lost. Did your dad meet or see any of these Germans himself? Because he's trained to fight as well.
Yes, well, there was a lot of combat going on, as I mentioned previously. There was a lot of gunfire. Dad actually had a bayonet rifle, which again is not something that the RAF would normally have. But because of the situation they were putting him in, they trained him specially to use this as well. And so apart from the firing between the two sides, Dad also had I can recall him saying about a couple of German fighters who actually surrendered to him.
Right.
He didn't know what to do with them, but they proved to be twice as frightened as Dad was.
So obviously they took over the beaches and stuff. How far into France did your dad end up going?
Well, they had to fight town by town all the way up through towards the centre. I'm afraid that I don't have as much information as you might find about all the towns they went through and so on, but they left pretty much destruction all the way through. But he was eventually told, they were near Paris, and they were told on the 24th of August 1944 to move in to an airfield at a race course, Auteuil, forgive me if I don't pronounce it right, Auteuil race course, to actually set up a radar station to stop the planes that were the enemy planes from what they call strafing the ground crews. Yeah. So they had to get set up very quickly. The French resistance, who were at the point of sussing the victory, if you like, of over Germany. They held back. They held Dad's team back because the French Liberation Army were ready to move into Paris. And they didn't want anything else happening before that. So they actually diverted a very short way, if you look at the map, to Longchamps. I think that's how they say it, race course. And this was on the 25th of August. And they set up the radar there. And it soon became apparent that they were very close to the French Liberation Army, who were about to parade into Paris. Now, Dad suggested to me that the way he put it was they wanted English to witness the parade in the liberation of Paris. So what they did, they invited him onto a tank that was going into Paris. My understanding from other reading is that there were other servicemen involved as well, but certainly I can only tell you as far as what Dad experienced.
So what happened when he got into Paris then?
Well, the first thing that he realised was that there was lots and lots of the French citizens welcoming. It was so, this was like the real change for them. They thought that's it. And the other thing that Dad realised straight away, after all the hell, as he put it, forgive the language, of what he'd witnessed all the way through France to get there, was that Paris was actually left pretty much untouched by the Germans. They felt that was a bit of a symbol, and that they wanted to keep. So he was really pleased about that. Now, when the French citizens realised that there was English involved on there, they wanted them to sing, and and I don't know if you know the song, but it's "A Long Way to Tipperary." That was one of the things that they wanted to sing. Now, that was what the army used to march to, and so they were well used to singing it. So yeah, they were really overwhelmed by the reception that they got from the from the French citizens.
Yeah.
How long did Stan get to stay there for, like in Paris?
They carried on moving throughout. So because obviously once the radar is set up and is operating, they move on to other areas because the Germans were still in retreat, if you like. So they had to almost follow them through. The last place that I know that he was at is up near Belgium, but it's still in the German side, so it was in Germany, because I've got evidence of that he spent his 21st birthday in this place in Germany, because two women sent him or gave him a drawing, a print, which I've still got now, which is signed by them and dated on his 21st birthday. Now, this is about 5 days before the Germans actually surrendered or signed the surrender document, and that's why Dad feels that he was a witness, because he was there at D-Day. He was on Omaha, where that was the worst beach to land on. Absolutely, the most died on that beach. He was there at the liberation of Paris, and he described it to me that he was there at the signing of the treaty as well. Now, that wasn't where he was, but he was in Germany, and I think that's what he meant.
Right.
Sadly, though, he's not here today. He would be able to answer these questions far better than I am. So yes, he that's why he felt he had to come back and tell his story. But it took him about 20 years before he could open up about it. Yeah. So, but whilst in, just going back to Paris, because I see we've got the photo behind me.
Yep.
That was taken on the 25th of August 1944, during the march into Paris. This was on the Champs-Élysées. I expect you've heard of that. Yeah. And a war correspondent who was there at the time, he was a very famous war correspondent, Bill Turner. He asked Dad, who had a borrowed push bike, he asked him to do a photograph with a Parisian girl on his crossbar, or on their handlebars as they call it, as a peace sort of sign, because that was after all the fighting, it was nice to get something like this. And so that photograph was taken behind me, and that's the last he thought he would hear of that. Actually, I've got the papers, the Sunday papers from the following week, on the 3rd of September, where they it was in two of the papers at least, the People and the Pictorial. I think it was Sunday Pictorial. I think anyway. I could confirm that later. I've actually got copies of the paper, of the photographs at the time, and in fact it went on to be a fairly world famous photograph of the peace coming from the war, and has been used in a number of different articles. Yeah.
After the surrender of the Germans, how long did it take for your father to return home?
I've got his record. That's not something I've looked at, but he definitely went on into 1945. So it was during, I think, this was after the surrender. He was still there for some time, and so it was 1945 before he came back to Devon, if you like, as it was then. Yes. All right. Anything else that you'd like to know? Okay. A little bit of background as to Father joining. Dad was aged 15 at the onset of World War II.
Yeah.
And the bombing of his hometown Exeter during the Blitz in May 1942 inspired him to enrol into the RAF. Now, he did so actually within a month, because in June 1942 he joined. And he then undertook special training. He was selected to join an RAF, what they call GCI unit 15082, and was part of the first echelon of the BDS on D-Day, referred to. He actually wrote a story about this, about his training, and that's in a document called Hankey's Circus. Hankey's Circus was named that because the first commanding officer they undertook, or that they got to know, was Hankey.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that was his name, and circus was because it was a real circus going through all this training. The training involved, amongst a lot of other things, they had to go to so many different radar stations around England and get to be the cream, if you like. They were selected from the cream, and there was about 200 to start, and then they gradually whittled them down, and in the end there was about 100 left. Now, not all of them even made it through, but each time, if they didn't make the mark, they were out. And Dad in the end got through, and he was a leading aircraftsman during the war. He joined as an aircraftsman, and he was promoted to leading aircraftsman during the war, maybe because of the loss of a leader, if you like, because there were so many people being killed, and so you had to promote people to be able to continue the structure. So that tells you a little bit about that. Would you like to know more about what he went through on D-Day itself?
Yeah, his friends sadly not make it through with him.
Yes, there was. It was as he described it, hell on earth, because first off, when they were approaching, they were due to go in at 11 o'clock in the morning, and it was, but something, they took a main hit on their flagship, if you like, so they had to turn about. It was obvious that the bombing that was supposed to have taken out most of the Germans before they arrived wasn't effective. So all of the enemy were there waiting for everything that was happening at Omaha. And what happened was that they turned around, they retreated back to sea, and they came in again about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And because the tide was different then, and because and because of the fire that they were under, the landing craft that they were on, I've got photographs of them on the landing craft, by the way, or a photograph. The landing craft didn't come in close enough to the beach.
Yeah.
Now, it might be because of sandbar, or it might be because the tide was in a different position, but they ended up being dropped into the water a lot deeper than they thought they would. Hence the problem with the uniform getting wet. So when they did get ashore, he thought he would stick close to what he called Hoppy. He had a nickname of a mate of his called Hoppy because he'd been very lucky. He'd come through combat before and a couple of times, and he thought, he's lucky, I'm going to stick to him. He got killed as he got off the boat by a sniper. So he describes it as that was the day that Hoppy's luck ran out. There were other ones. I think that was Hoppy Highfield, and there were others that he mentioned, but Hoppy Highfield is the one that sticks with me. And he, and there were others on the beach. He described it as being, even whilst they're on the beach, they had to replenish themselves. They had to drink, they had to eat, you know, because they were stuck there for, well, a very long time. He described it to me as 3 days, but I don't think it was 3 days. But that's what I think what it felt like. And so they had to eat and drink, and he can recall even trying to pass coffee or a hot drink to somebody, and he's gone, dead. And that was happening all around him. That was how he dealt with that emotionally. I don't know, because I don't know any of us that would be able to sort of just witness all this going on around them. So yes, there was lots of friends, and I think that's what stopped him being able to open up for years afterwards. Something that he did, he has done a school interview before now, and some of the school children were going on a trip to Normandy, like you guys are doing. And he asked her, one of the team, he asked her to place some flowers on Hoppy's grave. And so one of the newspaper articles I've got is of her placing the flowers on his grave. When I took Dad back to Normandy, this would have been about 25 years after the event. When I took him back, there were celebrations. So it was either a 5th or the 30th. I can't remember. It was either the 25th or 30th. And when I drove him back from Devon, I drove him just up to Weymouth and got on the ferry, drove across and we were there.
Yeah.
We were there within about 6 or 7 hours. And his amazement at how easy it was to do that, when the struggle that they had to go and do that, you know. And so, and when we went to the beaches, we seen some Americans. Now, and Dad wanted to go and speak to them, because the one thing that he recognised was the American -- because the American 1st Infantry, which is what Dad was assigned to, were known as the Big Red One. And so he wanted to speak to them, and he had a lovely time with him. I've got a photograph or two with him that I took of him with the Americans at Omaha. No, in fact, sorry, that would have been at the cemetery later. Okay, and it was, you know, it was clear that they were all, how can I say, emotional about the experiences that they'd gone through, because every one of them has lost so many others.
Did he show like any anxiety when he turned up at beaches?
No, he was just, as far as I could see, very reflective, very thoughtful, very, you know, he wanted to show me the beach. He had a little bit of a pet hate, in as much as a lot of his colleagues who were English, as I've described, died, as well as the Americans. But the Americans were buried in a cemetery, a new cemetery on top of Omaha Beach. The English weren't. They were taken to the English cemetery and Bayer, in Bayer. So that was one of his little pet things, that he thought, well, they were fighting together, but they were separated after death. but I went to the cemetery with him, both cemeteries, the English and the American cemetery, and it is there. If I'm sure you will be going.
Mm-hmm.
It's a spectacular, you know. It's very well preserved. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Been very quiet over there. Have you got no more?
I'm trying to think.
Was his friend Hoppy? Was it?
Yeah.
Was he part like a lieutenant, or was he just like a normal comrade?
I'll just. Well, right. He calls him an officer. So in what Stan's longest day is that's what this was termed, Stan's longest day. We had an officer called Hoppy Highfield, nicknamed that because he walked with a limp, having survived plane and motor racing crashes. I can remember staying really close to Hoppy, hoping that his luck would somehow protect him too. But my Dad's moral took a dive as the ramp went down, and the leather flying jacketed figure by me vanished, hit by a German sniper. So if you can imagine, this is, you know, they're just coming in on the boat, and the front has only just gone down to let them all off, and already his mate has gone. That's how quick it was.
Yeah.
And
was he part of the English unit, Hoppy?
yes. So yeah, and so that's why he was on. I may have to correct that, but something I haven't thought of asking myself before. So I will look, because one of the things that I'll be able to confirm that is I've got the photographs of the cemetery where he is and of his gravestone. So I will actually just confirm that. But as far as I'm aware, it was their officer, so I'm pretty sure he was English.
Right.
Yeah. And there was other things that he witnessed. There was a young American who used to use his Jeep. Now, as I said, they were on the beach for a long time. When you get there, you'll see the beach is actually quite a big place. It's quite a big beach. And he used this Jeep, marked with a red cross, to go and try and drag the wounded away from the beach, away from the fire. And he was doing it all day long.
Yeah.
And that's always impressed him. Impressed Dad how that went on, and also by the strict observance of the Germans, who at that time weren't shooting at the vehicle, the Red Cross vehicle. So he was, but and there was also, as he called it, Humble, Sergeant Humble, humble by name but not by deed, as he said, who was blinded. He tried to retrieve our aerial lorry from the sea. So there's another person now. He's on the beach. He's blinded. What's he going to do? He's wounded. He can't. You know, he's probably petrified. What can he do? He can't see what's going on. And then the last thing he remembers there was, I remember an American officer who yelled, "Let's get the hell out of here." And somehow he did.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yep.
So, in the preparation for D-Day, could you tell us a little bit about what happened at Slapton Sands?
Oh yes, Slapton. Slapton played a big part of the preparation for D-Day as far as the American troops were concerned. They actually evacuated Slapton village. Everybody had to leave. Yeah. And the Americans were put up in the village itself. Now, this is on top of, it's slightly inland, but it's just above what we call Slapton Sands, which actually is a bit more like shingle these days, but it's Slapton Sands. Was decided that it is so similar, or as similar as they can get, to the beach at Omaha. So they wanted to use the area to practice the landing, the landing onto the beach, and to getting troops off and that sort of thing. So each day they would, or each night I would say, Dad would go out with the Americans on the boats, and they would practice the landing. So they would go out to sea from Slapton, and they would, or Tor Bay. There was lots of places they went out from, and they would then try to practice their landing. Now each night they went out, they would see the German E-boats across the channel, looking at them. So they were just playing an observing role. So they would see them there every night, and they would come back in. They were probably wondering what they were doing, and vice versa. Yeah. Now, one day, they went out, and everybody was newly trained, and they went out, and something happened. There's a lot of historical sort of writings about this. Operation Tiger is what it was called. Yes. And so on this Operation Tiger, on this particular night, they went out, and something happened to spook the troops and the boats, and there was lots and lots of different boats involved, because when you get to know about D-Day and the crossing, there was multiple boats. You know, fleets and fleets of boats. So anyway, one night they went out, and there was some fire. There was some crossfire that went on. Now we don't know. Father's view was it was friendly fire with panicking going on. History suggested that it was the E-boats had opened fire on them. But who knows? I'm afraid I don't know what the actual truth was. Dad had one pair of eyes. Obviously there was lots of others there that would say something different. So lots of people died on that night. Tanks that were on board these landing craft, that made them very unstable anyway, and so they were all trying to change direction and so on. They lost tanks at sea, because obviously they were very top heavy. And so again, many people lost their lives, but this was, you've got to remember, this was months and months of training before D-Day. Yeah. This was all getting ready. And in fact, when Dad joined the RAF in 42, little did he know that there was, there must have been some sort of plan even at that stage, because the training that he undertook all the way through that was not to be a radar operator. It was to take part in this invasion. Yeah. So, and they didn't know. So they were doing this on Slapton Sands, and one of the down at Tor Cross, which is very close to Slapton. It's one end of the beach, if you like. Slapton is sort of in the middle of the beach, and Tor Cross is down at the end. Somebody decided, much against Dad's better judgment, to have one of the tanks recovered from the water. And they brought it up and they parked it in the car park of this hotel in Tor Cross, and it's become a sort of symbol for people to go and see about the Operation Tiger and so on. And Dad felt very strongly about that. Operation Tiger had nothing to do with Tor Cross, and nothing to do with him, and that he felt that the tank should have been left because so many people lost their lives there, and you know, it was wrong to bring it up, he felt. But that was, again, Dad's view.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, I think we've run out of time, Frank. We're very interested. We could carry on for hours, like we did when you first came to see me. But, gentlemen, do you want to say a thank you? Or
thank you for joining us.
Well, and thank you for taking an interest, because Dad had to impart this information to not only to me but to the world in all his newspaper cuttings, which I've got ample of.
Yeah.
And it's good that it's going to, it's skipping another couple of generations, if you like, to people like yourselves.
Yeah.
Because they can't be forgotten.
No.
All right. It's they must be remembered for what they did. Dad, I'm trying to sort of make sure it's what I would call out there in the ether, because what Dad did could only open his mouth and go to the local paper. What I'm doing is putting it onto the internet, into the world.
Yeah.
So hopefully, even when I'm gone and my kids are gone, you know, somebody will still be able to say,
yeah,
what happened on D-Day?
And now we'll have your record on film.
Yeah.